In the late 20th century, we have lost our way down the garden path. The machine has entered our gardens as well as changed the larger world around us. Confused by strange new forms in the landscape, we can't decide whether these cooling towers are beautiful or ugly. Most of us want to live and work surrounded with familiar running brooks, green trees, and grass all around. But many people find themselves in high-rises like these. A world of rural scenery is only a fleeting dream out of the past. Or a thin veneer of treetops lining roadways in a nearby park where the once clear stream, teeming with natural life, has been turned into an open sewer and garbage dump. We lead double lives. That pastoral illusion that we cherish in our homes, gardens, yards, neighborhoods, and parks require machines we depend on to be expelled, disguised, concealed, or ignored. We even need the machine to shape nature to our ideal form. And we admire the results in a flowery arbor such as this in the gardens of Dunbarton Oaks in Washington, D.C. As a cloistered garden, it is a perfect green haven for an ivory tower. Scholars now work here at Dunbarton Oaks in research on remote corners of garden history, the Byzantine Empire, and pre-Columbian art. The pastoral ideal, with its roots in a rural tradition, has long been the model for our gardens and parks in the modern world. But this fragmented classical world demands a stage-set landscape, devoid of all the technology upon which our world actually depends. The smokestacks and power lines needed to operate this greenhouse in the heart of Washington, D.C., for example, are carefully hidden from sight. Here at Dunbarton Oaks, we step into a magic world, a house surrounded by ancient trees, flower gardens, and shaded walks. It might have been lifted from the Arcadian English countryside of 200 years ago. But in fact, Dunbarton Oaks, built on steep terraces with elaborate water systems and an urban security system, could not have existed before the 20th century. Design inspirations throughout the garden have been drawn from every period, Roman, Renaissance, Baroque. But the synthesis works thanks to the unifying dominance of nature. Only an occasional plane heard overhead or the distant roar of traffic reminds the swimmer in her garden dream world that she is surrounded by a teeming metropolis of 3 million people just outside the gate. This nostalgic past evaporates the minute we step outside our controlled landscapes. The startling presence of our advancing technology is everywhere and increasingly offends us. Whether we like it or not, the real world of technology penetrates every corner of our environment. Industrial centers, throughways, shopping malls reduce our physical and psychic ideals to smaller and smaller pockets of retreat, no larger than a few redeeming boulders in a public park. But even granite boulders can generate a transcendent link with nature if they are all that is available to the nearby apartment dwellers. No wonder the golf course, modeled on an 18th century English park designed by Capability Brown, has become the ideal setting to restore the frayed nerves of the modern man and woman. These moments of therapeutic escape from the pressures and tensions of our modern world, where technology rules, have become essential. Like the great gardens of earlier times, a golf course such as this requires a staff of 20 or so gardeners, as well as machines, to keep it going. This country club, once a Virginia farm, offers the exclusive retreat of a former stately home. For the lucky few, the antique world of rural existence can be extended to their houses and gardens, strategically built on the very edge of the golf course itself. Within its confines, it is about as far as the urban family can go in capturing a few moments of a tension-free life in our advancing age of technology. The illusion of a simple agrarian world can also be found in the corporate business headquarters, surrounded by the same nostalgic past that inspired the golf course, and often, given the apparently natural landscape of an 18th century villa, down to the carefully placed man-made lake. So our attempts to escape from the realities of our technology-driven world have roots that reach into unexpected places. Take the ideal campus of the American college and university. Here at Princeton, men and women are trained, for better or for worse, to bravely lead our way into a disturbing new world of science. Yet the landscaped campus denies any connection between its rural imagery and the realities of the advancing science and technology being spawned within its mock Gothic walls. Behind this clump of trees lurks a state-of-the-art heating plant that makes these Gothic towers habitable. A pastoral landscape once again uses nostalgia to shield us from the present, a present that changes with alarming speed. A desert only a few years ago, advanced technology, including helicopters to bring in mature palm trees from the suburbs of Southern California, made this hotel possible. Las Vegas is unsurpassed in manipulating its landscape into an exotic artifact. Nature has reached its ultimate devaluation in the service of escape, when the interior rainforest blooms with artificial flowers. Here in this casino hotel, a staff of 80 gardeners are required to maintain the fantasy world of palm tree groves, mosaic jungles, and sleepy white tigers. Reinventing the garden environment as a theme world for entertainment has become a specialty in America. Tropical fantasy becomes a major part of the successful and hugely profitable gambling business. There's no longer any pretense in choosing garden models from a distant past. Any attempt on the visitor's part to hold on to his sense of reality is broken. Reason disintegrates as make-believe takes over. Las Vegas has created a world without tradition, a fantasy world where pleasure and profit are the only goals. This wholesale exploitation of water in a desert casino has been a cause for environmental concern. Of course, the fantasy world of Las Vegas does require enormous quantities of energy to keep it going. To produce that energy from hydraulic power, the Hoover Dam was built some 60 years ago and a short distance away. It utilizes the force of the Colorado River, providing the energy not only for nearby Las Vegas, but for much of California. It remains both a technological and aesthetic triumph. The man-made form of the soaring dam set in a natural landscape unites the real and the ideal. In its sheer beauty, Hoover Dam demonstrates that technology and nature can achieve an acceptable synthesis. But the most benign sources of energy are the thousands of wind-driven turbines of Northern California. Nothing of their character and scale has been seen before on the face of the earth. Their only environmental impact is the visual change in the landscape as seen from nearby highways and residences. The problem is purely aesthetic. Some homeowners have objected to their appearance and so curtailed their use. Yet the same owners have not objected to the polluting highways which they use every day to escape to their Arcadia. The debate between the conventional view of nature and our altered world continues. Naive cosmetic notions about gardens and landscapes are no match for the numbing grandeur of the Nevada desert. Only engineers and a few artists like Michael Heiser are daring enough to challenge it. In fact, Heiser grew up in this far west, where his father first introduced him to the mysterious beauty of art from an archaeological past. Moving from New York to this isolated ranch some 20 years ago, Heiser found in the western landscape that kind of unraped, peaceful, religious space artists have always tried to put into their work. In his studio that looks completely at home on the range, he works out complex problems of sculpture using a bold array of materials, machines, and techniques. Driving out to his work site in the desert is a normal part of the practical affairs of day-to-day living in a Western American ranch. It is like building sheds and fences, or driving merely 50 miles for food and basic necessities. Complex 1, like Hoover Dam and the windmill turbines, is without precedent, declaring its independence from the tradition of American landscape painting, sculpture, and design that had come before. In Michael Heiser's world, which includes machines of all kinds, operating a heavy-duty earth mover is just one way of solving his problems as an artist. The monumental scale of his conception recalls a pre-Columbian ceremonial center. Yet in this work, the largest man-made sculpture in modern times, there is a vital human connection with the earth, an inspired creation that overwhelms the passing dissonance of the machine's role in its construction. Heiser is working in the grand tradition of altering the landscape in the name of art, which is what garden making is all about. In New York, London, Paris, Beijing, whenever we think about it, the garden throughout history has belonged to the city. Gardens and parks have flourished wherever cities have been rich and powerful. No urban corporate headquarters would be complete without a green area, as here at the executive center of IBM in New York City. Science and technology, it goes without saying, make the huge bamboo clumps from the Far East thrive as if they were growing in the Mekong Valley. Like public spaces throughout history, IBM's garden is above all for people, some taking a rest from work and shopping. or taking a break from the grimmer realities of urban life that assail us in the late 20th century. Ever since the ancient Egyptians found solace under similar green shades, human beings have responded to the calming presence of nature. The best urban gardens have made a quiet retreat for the overstressed and a consolation to the lonely. Call it escape if you like, but Paley Park, with its waterfall to shut out the harsher sounds of the city, is the perfect urban park in miniature. New York City should have ordered 100 of them 20 years ago when it was built. In its uncompromising 20th century design, it has become the model of a tiny yet complete garden space on one of the most expensive pieces of real estate in the world. This garden on a rooftop may not be everyone's dream of a rose-covered cottage in the country, but there seems to be something in our genetic inheritance that dictates the tenacity with which we seek to connect with nature in a garden, no matter how difficult and in the face of almost impossible conditions. Invincible gardeners like these New Yorkers have refused to be defeated. Nor are they paralyzed by garden fantasies of an agrarian past, images that would inevitably disillusion and disappoint if they were our only garden models for living in a skyscraper. Even here high above the roar of New York City, one gets the sense that there exists a kind of community, a neighborhood, between people who are doing more than just coping as they pursue the age-old routine of growing things. So with the help of the machine, gardens continue to leave their indelible mark on the city and in unexpected places. It remains to be seen whether technology has raised insoluble problems for the world of nature and the world of gardens. As we have observed, nature has shown unsuspected flexibility in cooperating with the new challenge. We too must remain open to explore and to understand untested possibilities. On the horizon and even in our city streets, there are more than flickers of hope, both creative and pragmatic, that we may rise and surmount the radical changes to our lives that are yet to come. The Chelsea Flower Show is the nearest thing the British have to Mecca. Each spring, thousands make the pilgrimage to London to celebrate the sacred cult and mysteries of gardening.
Excited like little boys at the seaside.
The British are to be besotted with gardening as no other nation. And this, the largest, most important garden show in the world, is little short of a national religious shrine.
We've done better, actually,
Those little flowers, though, they're gorgeous.
And they got some strawberries, wild strawberries down there.
They have their own obsessions, their differences of opinion, but here they congregate to learn, commiserate, buy, and above all, celebrate the garden. No one can doubt that gardening is a defining quality of British character. Love of nature, freedom of expression within a desire for order, a stiff upper lip in the face of disappointment, all those qualities a gardener needs. When John Constable painted his father's kitchen garden, he was also capturing something that has shaped both that character and the gardens, the ever-changing moods of the seasons and the weather. Never mind the jokes that the words English climate inspire. Wind, mist, rain, a modest range of temperatures have turned what Shakespeare called this sceptred isle into a demi-paradise. William Blake saw England's pleasant pastures as a place to build the New Jerusalem, but even as Constable was painting the drama of the storm, England's green and pleasant land was succumbing to what Blake called so vividly the dark, satanic mills. Where cattle once grazed, iron foundries now spewed forth their sulfurous smog. Rivers became sewers, green became grime. The workers, herded into crowded cities, were deprived of their ancient right to grow their own food in their own garden. To remedy this, small plots of land, as here in Sheffield, were wrested from leftover strips of ground beside railways, factories, or housing estates above the mills on the edge of the city, and made available for a small annual rent. Today, these allotments serve much the same purpose as they did 100 years ago. A source of food for the family, perhaps also of money from the sale of surplus produce, and just as important, but often overlooked, a place of regular work for the unemployed until times get better. Percy Turnbull has lived in Sheffield all his life, but did not have an allotment until he was 50 years old.
They pulled our house down and we moved to some flats. And then when I saw the garden near to the flats, I decided to take an allotment, like, you know. But I'll tell you this, it nigh on killed me, that garden, because it hadn't been touched for 12 years when I took it over. And I got halfway across it and I thought, oh, you must be mad trying to do this. It's good for, you know, your commodities, what you get. I think they taste better than what you buy in shops. And the exercise you get from it, I think that keeps you fit. I think it's a real good fitness course myself.
The allotment gardener, though sharing his skills with his fellows, manages with marvelous ingenuity to put his individual stamp on ground he doesn't even own. Joe Forey left Hungary in the 1956 uprising. He became a coal miner here in Yorkshire, but missed the life he had led as a child on his parents' farm.
I like open air. I love open air, and therefore I decided to get allotment. Can you understand? You see a grow things in here, in the allotment, and you can able to have a natural sun. You not have to go nowhere, and you not spend your money going in the beer gardens. Let's face it, if I want fresh vegetables, and instead of go to a market to get in it, they give a far lot better taste, everything what I do grow, including strawberry. But you got to work at it to create a challenge. What I had last year, for me, is history gone. I want it better. And this is a main reason I am got allotment. I am 59 years old now. I'm planning I will live 105. Will I achieve it? That is other matter. And that's...
Even without a plot of land, people yearn for nature, its beauty, and its bounty. Window boxes, trees, municipal parks all help to give the city dweller something of the countryside that they cannot often visit. But if they do, they will find a man-made landscape little changed for centuries. It can look like a park with its mature trees, or like so many gardens neatly divided by age-old hedges and stone walls. And if they visit the ancient walled kitchen garden at Montesfont Priory in Hampshire, they will find the National Collection of Old Roses, now looked after by the National Trust. No flower is more identified with the history and gardens of the British Isles than the rose, and yet all of them have a foreign ancestry. Even the famous emblems of the Wars of the Roses, the red of Lancaster and the white of York, came from France, and before that from the Middle East and China. That so many roses of ancient lineage can be seen together here is the result of the far-sighted effort over many years by one of the greatest of modern rose authorities, Graham Stuart Thomas. He has had the rare honor of having a rose named after him. He rescued the only known specimen in Britain of Rosa gallica, the ancestor of almost all the specimens here. He collected examples of Chinese roses, such as Parsons Pink, first found over 1,000 years ago, of the damask roses first introduced into Britain by the Romans, and of the distinctive moss rose named for the mossy form of its buds. The day-to-day running of the garden at Montesfont is in the hands of its head gardener, David Stone.
I came to Montesfont in January 1978 as head gardener, and with very little experience of these roses, I plunged in my first season, did a wonderful job of pruning the roses until they flowered, and I realized I'd pruned out all the old wood, and as they flowered, they just fell flat on their faces. And that was a lesson I learned very early on how to prune shrub roses and how not to. Very difficult to define it, but I think one of the joys of these old roses that you don't get with the modern varieties is the pleasure of anticipation. They're with you for those few short weeks at midsummer, and therefore you daren't take them for granted, otherwise they're gone before you've had a chance to appreciate them. Roses I particularly like are the Gallica group, which is perhaps the earliest group of all the roses. Classic simplicity in their flower and the richness of their colours. I don't think there are any roses that infuriate me. Some are troublesome, very prone to foliar disease, but that is the price we pay for the beauty of the flowers.
For all the great gardens we can visit or read about in books, the triumph of English gardening is the work of amateur gardeners. Their achievement in hundreds of thousands of gardens in every shape and kind across the country is the envy of the rest of the world. The National Garden Scheme was founded in 1927 to tap this enthusiasm in the cause of charity. At first, only a few private gardens were open to the public to raise money for medical charities. Today, 2,500 gardens bring in over £1 million each year. On a July day in the village of Sennington in North Yorkshire, half a dozen gardens are on show. Pay your £1.50 to Farmer Bill Baldwin on the village green, and you can visit them all.
Right, there are 6 gardens open. Six. 2 on this side of the river, 4 on the other side of the river. They're all signed, right, and there's a plant stall up at the far end. I think there'll be plants for sale in most of the gardens, and there's other stalls all around the place.
I see. Thank you very much. When we come to tea, is that?
Tea is in the village hall, just behind me here.
Thank you.
Bill Baldwin's wife, Jane, is the scheme's organizer for North Yorkshire.
We find gardens which we consider suitable, ask the owners if they would mind opening on one Sunday in the year, and organise all the publicity for them, and usually turn up on the day when a new garden opens to support them. They're very nervous the first time and they don't know what's going to happen, but the next year it's much easier and they're much happier. We moved to this house 10 years ago, and there was no garden whatsoever. So my next door neighbour here almost got me by the scruff of the neck and said, "You've got to garden," and gave me Christopher Lloyd's Well-Tempered Garden, and away I went, really. And then quite suddenly I was one of these mad women that was sprouting Latin names at people that I'd thought 20 years ago were up the wall. I wanted to make a sort of cottage garden at the front of the house because there was a path that leads up to the front door, and I felt it needed to be a cottage garden, but I didn't want it to be too chaotic. I wanted it to be organised cottage garden. I don't like colours that really clash. You won't find much orange and you won't find much real red, scarlet in the garden. So this is what I did at the front of the house, and then at the back of the house we opened up an old scruffy area. And my husband worked hard to get a bit of different level and got a vista, and hopefully the eye will lead you through.
Oh, I've just got... Yes, I'll show you where mine is. I hope it's going to do really well.
Once I start to garden, I think I'm a much happier person. I'm not an unhappy person, but I'm much more lively and positive. I've got masses more energy once I'm gardening. And in about 3 weeks' time, we should be picking pounds of apricots. Sometimes you get disheartened and say you'll never bother to garden again when you've had days of wind and everything's burnt. And then, of course, you get rain and sunshine and warmth and things grow and you're set on course again. And you forget the bad days, really.
Thank you very much. You're welcome.
For the Baldwins and their fellow enthusiasts, their gardens are their pride and their private paradise. Indeed, one could say that the Garden of Eden itself would be the ideal British garden where, in the temperate climate, flowers, shrubs, and trees can be brought from the 4 corners of the earth to make a paradise regained. God probably had in mind Bodnett in North Wales. In 1874, it became the home of Henry Potchin, who had made a fortune from industrial chemistry. He planted many of the great trees and also added on the magnificent conservatory for tender plants. But it is to his grandson Henry, the second Lord Aberconway, that we owe the peerless garden. It was he who, from 1904 onward, designed and supervised the construction of the series of terraces. The lowest terrace, with its canal, is crowned by an 18th century garden pavilion. Lord Aberconway found it derelict 200 miles away in Gloucestershire. He had it carefully dismantled and then rebuilt here in North Wales. Above the canal is the Rose Terrace, and above that, flanked by 2 cedars planted by Henry Potchin, the Lily Terrace. The present Lord Aberconway inherited Bodnett on the death of his father in 1953. A past president of the Royal Horticultural Society, he has also inherited his father's enthusiasm and expertise.
If I survive, able to look after the garden for another 10 years, he and I together will have run this garden with the help of the marvelous Puddle family for almost all of that time for 100 years.
Bodnett's marvelous Puddle family are 3 generations of head gardeners who have served the Aberconways since 1920. First Frederick, then his son Charles, and today his son Martin.
The story of how the splendid Puddle family came here is really rather romantic. I was 6 years old in 1919, and I'd been given a Christmas present by my godmother, and I must have written to thank her for it. Dear godmother, thank you so much for my Christmas present. It was just what I wanted. And then I must have scratched my head as to how to get onto the obligatory second page. And I wrote, our head gardener has died. My father is looking for another one. Love from Charles. And Miss Wilmot wrote to my father and said, do not omit to consider Mr. Puddle. Mr. Puddle was considered and appointed, and there they have been since.
Martin Puddle spent a good many years gaining horticultural experience away from Bodnett. So when he was invited to take over from his father in 1982, he was able to bring not only continuity, but fresh ideas.
Yes, if possible. It's been built up with a very personal attitude and a very personal involvement by these two families. The fact that we haven't been tied to a historical background, I think, has given us greater scope to improve the garden. And also it's allowed us to introduce plants and also to introduce up-to-date plants, which may be better than their predecessors. And I actually plant plants, envisaging them in my mind in 40 years' time, and these become the focal points of the future. At Bodnett, we have an amazing collection of plants from all parts of the globe, many from Australia, New Zealand, and also Chile, but I suppose the most of all come from the Himalayan regions, and they were brought here by some of the plant collectors. One of the most spectacular plants in June and early July is Cornus Cusa chinensis from the Chinese regions. I think that when you're looking at plants, you should look at a plant as an overall product. The beauty of the bark and also the foliage, and maybe its fruits are just as important as its flowers. There are the giant redwoods, which at this time of the year, their bark is probably their most biggest asset, and they really are beautiful.
My pet aversion in gardening is people who say, I'm not going to plant that because I will never see it at its best. I plant things for eternity. Describing to friends why I planted a certain tree in a certain place, I say, let's meet here. 100 years hence, you come down, I'll get special permission to come up, and we'll see what it looks like.
A deep sense of continuity is yet another side of British character expressed in the traditions of English gardens. But to pick a garden which best sums up all these characteristics is a dangerous step in a country where everyone is an expert on the subject. However, there should be little disagreement with Great Dixter being placed near the head of the list. It is the Sussex home of the renowned gardener Christopher Lloyd. The blending of architecture with garden and landscape is a special British genius. Here at Great Dixter, the house, barns, and hedges look as if they had been created at the same moment centuries ago, growing together organically. Great Dixter, like a Zen temple in Kyoto, seems beyond time. But in 1910, there was only a derelict 15th century manor hall and no sign of a garden. Christopher Lloyd's father, Nathaniel, bought it and commissioned the architect, Edwin Lutyens, to restore and extend the house and to lay out a garden. The approach to the front door is immediately striking. Instead of the expected close-cut lawns, there are wild meadows with rare flowers, mown twice a year. They were instigated by Nathaniel's wife, somewhat against her husband's taste. He liked everything shipshape and neat-edged. She passed on to her son, Christopher, a love of nature less tightly constrained.
Yes. I don't go in for symphonies of grey and silver too much. They're for more cultured gardens.
Yes. I like it to be natural.
My mother used to say, and I did, I think, too, as a child, we must protect this from Daddy and the gardeners, because if something seeded itself where it shouldn't be, in the paving, we were very keen that it should grow there, but the danger was that it would just be eliminated like a weed. Lawns are sacrosanct in England, and my barber, for instance, he tells me he's so proud of his front lawn that he gets upset even if he sees a bird walking across it. Whereas, well, lawns really are just as much trouble, square foot for square foot, as borders are. And I think borders are very much more exciting than turf. I believe in growing all kinds of plants together that will give you variety, but that will look well together. It can look good the whole year round, I think, not just for colour, which is only temporary, but for good shapes. I mean, you don't want your border to look the same every year. So I don't mind my plants flopping over the edge. I hate to see a hard cliff-like edge and then a strip of earth before you get to the first plants, which are carefully chosen, squat little things like dwarf marigolds and azuretums, which won't go beyond the spot where they were planted. That doesn't look comfortable to me at all. My father was very interested in topiary, and so, although Lutyens laid out the lines of the hedges, it was my father who was in control. He was very keen that they should have a batter on them, which is an architectural word, so that they sloped inwards and didn't overhang at the top after a few years. If you start straight up and down, after a time, the top having got more light than the bottom, you get an overhang. Well, he knew all about that. You do need bold features in a garden. You don't want everything to be misty. You want things that stand out and draw the eye and say, here I am, look at me. Some people disapprove of them, but I think strong contrasts are very exciting. It is terribly important to conserve, but it is also rather facile, and very often it's an excuse for avoiding fresh thinking. There is a danger that we don't look forward enough, because there are big changes in horticulture going on all the time. I think there's a danger of fossilization as well as conservation. It sometimes stultifies young gardeners coming along that their input of fresh ideas is rather quashed by tradition and by those who say, do not, rather than go ahead and try that.
The English garden is not likely to be squashed by tradition. The dynamics of nature and its changing forms would prevent it. Over the centuries, experiment and the go-ahead spirit of the English gardener has created masterpieces. Individual character fed with perennial fresh thinking has been the foundation of a glorious art. It is the secret appeal of perfected nature.